was very scary. Will they support us? And even now, I talk to other founders of color. We talk about how during BLM, we got all of this like groundswell of support. And then as soon as that was over, it was like, where'd everyone, what happened, right? It was like, guess we're not important anymore.
The same thing with women's month. People be like, what can we do to support you in March? It's like, rent's due 12 months a year, people. Come back tomorrow.
That's real.
We've all been there. Your team's feedback is scattered across emails, chats, and sticky notes. It's a mess. But PDF Spaces in Adobe Acrobat gives you one collaborative workspace to streamline every file and comment. Learn more at adobe.com/do-that-with-Acrobat.
Welcome to The Business Model by Inc. I'm Graham Winfrey. Today, we're kicking off a new founder group chat focused on how to scale a brand in the food and beverage space. I'm excited to share some great conversations with a dynamic set of founders.
All right, so I'm Ron Holloway, founder and CEO of Wolf Bowl. We're a food truck for dogs, and we focus on nutrient-dense treats, but they look remarkably like human food items.
Hi, my name is Leanne Darland. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Talea Beer Company. We're the only female-founded brewery based here in New York City. We have 5 tap rooms across Manhattan and Brooklyn, and we're expanding across the Northeast.
My name is Gabi Lewis, co-founder and co-CEO of Magic Spoon. We reimagine your favorite childhood breakfast items with more protein, less sugar, and more fiber.
As you can hear, Ron, Leanne, and Gabi have really different businesses. What they have in common is that each founder took inspiration from something in their own life to start their company. So on this founder group chat, we're talking origin stories, and we'll learn about some of their early challenges and what pieces of advice helped guide them through. Welcome to the show, everyone. The three of you have really diverse backgrounds and origin stories for your company. So I want to talk first about how you got these companies started. Ron, you have a special origin story. We'll start with you.
Speaking of origin stories, if you allow me, I like to start with this. I joined the military because of 9/11. And to be in this building today, I can't explain how special this is to be with.
We're at 7 World Trade Center.
Absolutely. So, yeah. To be in, this is my first time. I joined the military because of 9/11. I was in boot camp by that December. So, and I come from extremely humble beginnings. So to be here today and to sit with these amazing founders and with this amazing team of people, just when you talk about origin stories, I just wanted to share that. This is really special. Now to Wolf Bowl, boring. Wolf Bowl, basically, I always like to ask people this question. What do you do for someone you love? One of the things you do is you cook for them, right? And you want to give them the best possible ingredients, the best meal possible. So once my partner and I, my lovely wife, Solakina, once we did this for our dogs, it freaked us out. I mean, their stools were better, their energy were better, their allergies went away, their gas went away, mine didn't. Be careful, everyone here.
Well, you weren't eating the food.
That's right. But no, seriously. So after doing this for almost 10 years for our pups, it was like, man, like how can we teach people what we learned but make this like cool, make this us? And Wolf Bowl was born. And so, we've been hitting the streets ever since. And, it's funny because, I just finished John Mackey's book, The Whole Story, founder of Whole Foods, and I watched some of his subsequent promo interviews. And one of the things that he was a big food snob like us, like nutrient dense, et cetera. We all know his story. But one thing he talked about in his origin was play. And he always stresses that the importance of entrepreneurs and playing. And so that's what Wolf Bowl really is. It's nutrient dense, it's us playing and just reminding ourselves that we're kids and having fun with the best things in the world, dogs. Both of these companies here, they're at play. I'm watching what they do, so it's awesome. That's Wolf Bowl.
And did you immediately say, let's do this via a food truck? Or what were the initial ideas for how to spread this gospel of nutrient-dense food for pups?
That's a great question, Graham. So yes, it was. So we have other ideas, but I have to be careful. We'll get to that later. But no, we wanted to do a food truck specifically because it was like, I know there's other crazy people like us. Let's go to them. Almost like the, build the supply and the demand will follow. And this was almost like a rebirth for us. We've had, Solo and I, we were kind of in the top 10%. We kind of had that millennial mid-quarter life crisis. And so we said, okay, all right, we're going to do this and we're going to be truly us. But how can we tap into the community? How can we go places that other pet food and pet brands weren't going? And so the truck was just an amazing way to do that. And it's exceeded our expectations.
Leanne, your background was in finance and you loved beer. Talk about getting Talia off the ground.
Yeah, so I originally fell in love with beer when I was stationed in San Diego. I was in the Navy and was surrounded by craft beer when it was really the craft beer boom in the U.S. Planted a seed in my mind, like, wouldn't it be so cool to have a brewery of my own someday? But all I knew about it was that I liked drinking it. Went on to work in finance, like you said, and worked at Google for a while in the Bay Area and just couldn't get beer off my mind. And I didn't realize it, I think, in my early 20s, but really had an entrepreneurial spirit that I needed to pursue. So I wanted to figure out how to get into beer. But at that time, there were a lot of craft breweries in the U.S. So I was like, is this really financially viable? Or is this just a bunch of garage projects that have turned into passion projects? So I kind of took a halfway step in. I left Google to join a beer e-commerce startup based in Berkeley as their head of finance. That company moved its headquarters here to New York City. And the month I moved here is the same month I met my now co-founder, Tara Hankinson. She left the New York Times to join that beer e-commerce startup as well. So we both had very similar lives on different coasts, both had gotten our MBAs, worked in more traditional corporate fields, but loved beer. And within 3 months of meeting each other, we had formed what's now Talea.
Gabi, Magic Spoon wasn't your first rodeo. Why cereal?
So I grew up, like most people, loving breakfast cereal, but realized at a certain point that it's not always the healthiest option. And yes, I'd had a protein bar business beforehand, so I had a bit of experience in the food industry. But when I was looking at the cereal aisle and kind of realizing how it's this, first the entire aisle, and most categories in food and beverage are not entire aisles, so massive category. And kind of noticed that it hadn't changed and it looked the same 5 years ago as it did 15, 25 years ago. And I'd seen all these other categories kind of grow up in what I saw almost as three waves. So wave one is you have these sugary, not very good for you products. Wave two is a little more better for you, a little more organic, a little more natural. Maybe there's real cane sugar, not corn syrup, but still not nutritionally optimal. Wave three, you have brands like at the time there was in ice cream, there was Halo Top, in candy there was Smart Sweets. They're actually trying to flip the nutrients on the head and radically reimagine a product, making it more nutritionally dense, maybe more protein, maybe fewer calories. And I said to people in the industry, why has nobody done that for breakfast cereal? It's this entire category just stuck in this old paradigm of sugar and carbs and junk ingredients. And nobody gave me a good answer. They would say, well, nobody ever wants to pay more than $3 for a box of cereal, and you can't make healthy cereal for $3 a box. But I just saw endless categories where people would pay more for a higher quality product. Or they'd say, well, the cereal market's in decline, and you should never go into a declining category. But to me, I looked at this category that was $11, $12 billion, declining very slowly, but still enormous, and only declining because it wasn't speaking to today's consumer. So again, I kept on asking these reasons why. I got no satisfying answers as to why nobody had done this. Nobody had reimagined cereal for the modern consumer. And so I went on a journey and spent about a year with my co-founder seeing, is it possible to recreate classic breakfast cereal for the modern consumer? Meaning that same taste texture we love, colorful, joyful fun, but more protein, less sugar, more fiber. And after about 6 months of hundreds of iterations in R&D, we came up with a formula we were proud of. We called up the investors from our last business, told them we were getting into the cereal game, and we launched Magic Spoon actually exactly 7 years ago from yesterday.
Wow, congrats.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Happy 7th.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
I want to ask each of you what the best piece of advice you got was before, right up to the day you launched your business. Leanne, let me start with you because there were folks who said that the craft beer market was oversaturated when there were 5,000 breweries in the U.S. Now we're almost at 10,000.
Yeah.
I can't imagine you didn't talk to some people who said, do not start another craft brewery. But anyway, what was the best piece of advice you got before starting the company?
I had a great mentor who started a brewery in San Francisco, probably for like 4 years before us. We really joined at the peak. Really didn't time that well. But two things. One's a little more practical piece of advice for like any entrepreneur thinking about making the leap. And he said, if you have a paying job, you should do this side hustle as long as possible while you're at that paying job to the point where they fire you because you're doing such a poor job at your paying job and you're obsessed with this new business. So that was really good advice. I mean, Tara and I were at our company until we had a beer in hand ready to hit the streets. In about 8 months, we were trying to keep it under wraps as we were developing the product. So that's the practical piece of advice. But two, he just had a lot of confidence in the fact that very few women are in the space. And yes, there were 10,000 breweries in the U.S. when we decided to join, but less than 2% were owned exclusively by women. So his confidence in us really was really helpful in giving us that nudge to take the leap.
And Ron, I don't know what kind of precedent there was for pet food via food truck before Wolf Bowl. So I imagine you probably heard some interesting advice before launching.
Absolutely. Our family still hates us to this day because we quit our jobs and did the dog food truck. No, there was no precedence. And I hate to say this not to make it racial, but this is like literally, I learned this in business school. This is the whitest industry in America. Mm-hmm. So there are very few people that, like, we don't even register. That's how few people of color are in the pet industry. And then on top of that, doing a dog food truck. But that was important to our differentiation because, this is about us. And so we knew we had to do something special, but we knew it had to be us. And so in terms of like advice, the best advice we got, and this is so indicative of how Solo and I work, the best advice we ever received was attention is not connection. Mm-hmm. Attention is not connection. And my friend here, who's a veteran, who now I love because I didn't know she was a Navy veteran. I'm a Navy veteran, so we're gonna be good friends. But really quick anecdote, if you'll allow me. Mm-hmm. So, I was in the Navy for about a year or two. Passed my physical exam, passed my written exam. I'm really excited. I'm advanced, so I come to muster quarters the next day. I got my, I'm ironed up. You could get a paper cut on my creases. I got the new patch on my arm, and so I come in. I'm at muster. I'm ready, and my chief comes in, and he comes over to me. He walks over to me slowly, and he punches me on my arm. And it wasn't too hard, wasn't too soft, but it was like, you feel me. And so he said, "You want to be a good leader now?" I gave him the face like, trying to play it cool. And I said, "Of course." And he said, "If you want to be a good leader, remember one thing." He said, "It's about your people. It's not about you anymore." He said, "Because they will write your resume, they will write your awards, and they will ultimately be the reason whether you're successful or not." And so Solo and I, that is the ethos and the logos of everything we do. It's why you rarely see our faces on social media. It's why we don't, put our resumes out, is because we want everything to be about the community, about the art, about the culture, and that's the best advice I ever received in my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gabby, how about you? You had already had a protein kind of bar business, so this wasn't totally uncharted territory for you, but what advice did you get about launching a cereal brand?
I think one of the greatest learnings that people gave in the form of advice after my prior business was really make sure there's product market fit before you launch. Which, of course, sounds like business 101, but I think there's also this idea amongst driven, ambitious entrepreneurs that if you're good enough, you can make any idea work and you can push through perseverance, through just being really smart about how you connect the dots. And especially, in the kind of boom of startups of the past few decades, that idea sunk in for me in my last business. In my last business, we did not have product market fit, and we spent 6 years pushing a boulder up a hill. And eventually we had an okay outcome, not the outcome we were hoping for, but an okay outcome. And so the second time around, I wanted to really make sure we had product market fit. And we spent a fair amount of time validating it and making sure that when we launched, we felt that consumer pull rather than pushing. And I think a lot of founders underestimate the difference in how successful a business can be and how quickly you can kind of skyrocket if you have that pull from the consumer versus an idea that's just okay, but you're trying to make work. So that was something I really internalized after the first business and made sure I carried through to the second business.
And what was it about, because people think, protein bars are all the rage right now. What didn't give you the product market fit that you were, in search of?
So the protein bar business I ran was called Exoprotein, and we were developing insect protein as a sustainable food source. So we were building a supply chain for sustainably grown and farmed and harvested crickets, which was part of it was in the US, part of it I moved to Thailand for a while working with farmers there. So we were building a supply chain from scratch, which there were logical reasons why we were trying to introduce this into the food system in the US. Insect protein is far more sustainable, requires far less water, less feed per gram of protein. And so that was the idea. Protein bars were the vehicle that we were introducing that sustainable protein source to the consumer through. And so we partnered with a 3 Michelin star chef to create this line of protein bars with cricket protein in them. So it was a massive swing. I started that business in college. It turned out that getting the first couple million dollars of sales was easier than we thought. It really resonated in the CrossFit communities and the paleo communities, but crossing the chasm to the mainstream consumer was really, really hard. And we tried to push that for too long to make that mainstream. Ultimately, that was not going to be a $100 million business. It didn't have the product market fit for that scale. And so that was something we internalized for next time.
No, that's a really interesting point, and I just kind of want to piggyback that. We get asked, Solo and I get asked a lot from other founders. We get messages and emails all the time about product market fit, how do you start a business, how do you build a business, and something that we always regurgitate to them is when you're building a business, I think it's important, me personally, is you need to know what game you're playing. And I'm using the word game affectionately and respectfully. Are you building a $500 million business? Are you building a $50 million business, or are you building a $5 million business? When I was in business school, I had a business professor who used to say, Ron, it's systems thinking. When you're in systems thinking, you don't sacrifice the design of a house for the room, you sacrifice the design of the room for a house. And so, I'm being funny, but, that's so true to your point. I'll just use us as a humble example. When we started, they said, oh, everyone's like franchise. And that's fine. I get it. But for us, we're really deep thinkers, and sometimes to a fault. And so I think for us, it was like, okay, let's think about that. What's at risk? What's at stake here? Do you think about supply chain risk management? Do you think about triple marginalization? Are you thinking about quality control? Are you thinking about customer service? Are you thinking about disremediation? These are all things that you have to consider, to your point. And I think sometimes founders just go in and say, well, I don't know what I want, or I want 100. And I think understanding that structure follows strategy is what Gabi just mentioned, I think is important for founders or anyone going into business.
What you said about the scale you're looking to achieve, I think is so often missed.
100%.
And often I'll speak to early stage founders and they'll present this idea for a food company or a beverage company, and they'll ask if I think it's a good idea. And my first question is exactly what you said. It's like, well, is it a good idea? It depends. Are you trying to build this into a $100 million business? Are you trying to raise venture capital? Are you trying to have a lifestyle business?
Yeah.
And the answer is just entirely dependent on what you're trying to build. And if somebody has an idea for maybe a niche condiment, maybe it's an amazing idea for building a regional kind of natural food store size business that can support them, but it might be a terrible idea for building a $100 million business.
Great point, brother. Yeah.
Next, we'll hear about some challenges our founders faced early on in their journeys. That's after a quick break.
We've all been there. Your team's feedback is scattered across emails, chats, and sticky notes. It's a mess. But PDF Spaces in Adobe Acrobat gives you one collaborative workspace to streamline every file and comment. So if you need 6 departments to finally agree on a proposal, do that with Acrobat. Need to turn a mountain of feedback into one plan of action? Do that with Acrobat. Want to stop searching for files and finally get everyone on the same page? Do that with Acrobat. Learn more at adobe.com/do-that-with-acrobat.
Gabi, before launching, what did you think would be the biggest challenge, and what ended up being the biggest challenge in those early days?
I thought creating demand would be the biggest challenge. Because I had come from a business that was so edgy. So the business I had before, cricket protein bars, so buzzworthy. We launched that when we were in college. We were covered by Inc., by Fast Company, by New York Times, like everything, which to me as a 22-year-old was absolutely insane. And then by contrast, this new company, high protein breakfast cereal, seemed to me just like inherently less buzzworthy. I thought it'd be harder to get initial traction. What actually happened was, yes, it was less buzzworthy, but it was such an easier sell to the consumer that it was really easy to generate demand. And in fact, I worked with some of the same influencers in both companies, and I was able to literally see company A, an influencer posted, we got a few $100s in sales. Company B with better product market fit, same influencer posted, we got many thousands of dollars in sales. So demand generation turned out to be pretty easy. It was actually supply chain that was harder, which again was the opposite of what I expected because it sounds like such a simpler idea, simpler product, but this scale was just so much greater. And with that scale comes complexity. So we blew through our year one forecast probably in week 2.
Was it all e-com too?
The first 3 years were entirely e-com, which also wasn't the plan. I thought we were going to do e-com for the first 6 months or so, prove the concept so that Whole Foods or some retailer called us, and then quickly go to retail. But in fact, e-com just worked. It worked and it was profitable.
The pandemic was shortly after you.
Yeah, that was several months after.
Great point.
So it started working already. We actually had a lot of influencers as investors in the business, so they were really incentivized to promote the product online without us paying Meta necessarily for a large amount of ads. And then in the pandemic, and so for a number of reasons, we were able to run the business to real scale just online for the first 3 years.
Leanne, what about you? What did you think would be the biggest challenge and what turned out to be in that early first year, 18 months maybe?
Brewing the beer was easier than we thought. So similarly, we had a proof of concept that we wanted to bring to market so that we could then get investors to come on board so that we could build our own production facility, et cetera, et cetera. So we were able to contract brew our first product, had it in hand, and I think we both just, and still continue to this day, really underestimate how hard it is to get share of mind or share of eyes or what a large beverage company called share of throat. Especially in this dense market in New York City. So we were completely unknown entities. A lot of people in the craft beer industry, they grew up together, they homebrewed together, they have like a pretty tight-knit community, but Tara and I were total outsiders. And we literally had to go door to door with beer in our backpacks, walking into bars, trying to get the bartender to introduce us to the buyer who was inevitably never there, even when we could see them. And so it was super humbling. We cried on the streets. But we were in it. And we gave ourselves a timeline, like, let's do this for 6 months. Let's see if we can raise like a certain amount of money so we can start to pay ourselves something. And still to this day, it's such a competitive market. 75% of our revenue comes from our brick and mortar spaces. And there are, I think, 20 new restaurants and bars opening this summer in Williamsburg, which is where our like flagship is. It's just like staying top of mind in a space like this is really hard. And we can't do e-com. It's such a highly regulated industry that it's very difficult to scale in that way.
Well, I doubt you're still going door to door with backpacks, but if you are, or any employees are, rollerblades are maybe a good option. The Vita Coco coconut water founder started on rollerblades, and that's how he would get to more places.
I love city bikes.
Yeah.
I'm a big city bike
Me too.
fan.
Yeah.
But rollerblades, I'm down for that.
Worked for him, but that was like 20 years ago.
Yeah,
we'll do it together. I'll help you. I got you.
I'm also very envious of your ability to like go to where your customers are because again, we can't pop up with a beer truck at a park. But I mean, we could see how far we could get.
Yeah.
But
you and I will do something.
Maybe there's a collab
we'll do it.
opportunity.
Oh, 100%.
I just love it. I think it's
100%. No, I love what. Go ahead, Greg.
Well, I was just going to give you the opportunity to answer the same question. What was the hardest part in the early days, and what did you think was going to be the hardest part? But if you want to comment off what she said first, that's fine.
No, I was great point. So I love that Leanne talked about business development. So we're all about partnerships, and that's to your point, excellent point. That's one of the main reasons why we decided to do a dog food truck. So we've partnered with the Brooklyn Museum, who shouted us out on social media. Like, the Brooklyn Museum shouted it. Like, that's insane. I've had celebrities, Mike Greenberg, Amy Sherrill, who did Michelle Obama's Smithsonian photo. Like, we've worked with the Puppy Bowl. So to your point, to be able to have that truck to do these kind of brand activations, right? It's just been amazing. And again, it's those touch points. It's almost like what Maya Angelou said. People will forget what you've done, they'll forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. We're a feeling. You can't get that from Amazon.
Yeah.
Our company is a feeling company. But back to the original question, what destroyed us early on, and I actually had mental blackouts. When we started, I gave my military, I know, right? I gave my military life savings to a contractor to do the build out for our truck. This contractor ultimately ended up filing for bankruptcy and liquidation and ended up taking over like $3 million from companies. So we started out with almost two hands tied behind our back. So not only have I started this thing, and then 2 or 3 months later, COVID happens. So it's like one gut punch after another. And so we were basically playing catch up. So that was really hard in the beginning. Then also, again, I hate to beat a dead horse, but being people of color in this industry, it was very scary. You know, will they support us? And even now, I've talked to other founders of color, you know, we talk about how during BLM, we got all of this like groundswell of support. And then as soon as that was over, it was like... Like, where'd everyone, like, what happened? You know? And so, right, it was like, guess we're not important anymore.
Same thing with Women's Month. People be like, what can we do to support you in March? It's like, rent's due 12 months a year, people. Come back tomorrow.
That's real. Yeah, so I think those were the things. But now we're kind of at equilibrium. We're kind of cruising. And our focus now is don't chase, attract. So everything that we attract, just like you're reaching out, like good dude, it worked out perfect with Seth. Everything that attracts to us works out really well. We don't chase anymore. We used to chase in our corporate 9-to-5s. I'm with my wife, beautiful, amazing, genius. I mean, she's worked on things she can't even talk about, and we live that life of chasing. And like I said, it's like the movie Revenant. I don't know if I said this already. You know, Leonardo DiCaprio says like, you know, I ain't afraid to die. I've done it already. Like that's where we are. Yeah.
You guys have passed that.
Oh, past that, way past that status. Yeah.
Well, that's a great place to stop. Thank you so much for talking about your origin stories. Next time on Founder Group Chat, we'll pick it up again with Ron, Gabi, and Leanne with a new topic, launch strategies. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Business Model from Inc. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on Inc.'s YouTube channel at youtube.com/Inc Magazine so you don't miss an episode.